Welcome back to the Avery Messenger Podcast. I'm your host, D'Aujai Kelley, and I'm here with my co-host,
Georgette Mayo, who is a processing archivist. Today, we're going to provide a little information about the formation of the Avery Normal Institute and the Avery Institute. We have acquired excerpts from the booklet, A History of Avery Normal Institute from 1865 to 1954 by Drs. Edmund L. Drago and Eugene C. Hunt for our historical narrative.
Avery's educational mission was to evolve in response to a wide range of social forces that converged on Charleston during the near century of the school's existence. For most of its history, it was the area's sole college preparatory institution open to Black students. In that role, Avery emphasized training whose object was to produce and liberally educated, politically active, socially responsible Black leadership. Initially titled the Tappan School in honor of New York abolitionist Lewis Tappan, an original member of the American Missionary Association, the school was headed by Thomas Cardozo in 1865, then later by his brother Francis, both products of Charleston's free Black community. Taking on the role of Avery's principal, Francis Lewis Cardozo sensed education was deeply meshed with the political struggles of Reconstruction. The feeling of hate and revenge towards colored people seems to be fiendish. They are throwing every obstacle in their way. One thing especially provokes them, our school, as Cardozo stated. Before Cardozo could begin to develop his educational program, he had to find a permanent home for the new school for 1,000 students and 20 teachers who were Northern white missionaries and members of Charleston's free Black community. In late 1865, General Rufus Saxton of the Freedmen's Bureau offered the use of the State Normal Building, currently known as Memminger School, on St. Philip Street, renaming it to the Saxton School. The building was appropriated for military use and was soon returned to its original owners. Cardozo soon learned from the AMA that trustees of the estate of the late Reverend Charles Avery of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, were expected to pledge $10,000 for the establishment of a Black college in Atlanta, Georgia. At Cardozo's and the AMA urging, they persuaded the Avery trustees to make a similar contribution in Charleston to purchase a residence for the teachers at 121 Bull Street and an adjacent lot for the erection of a permanent school building. Built by the Freedmen's Bureau at a cost of $17,000 and renamed Avery in honor of the chief donor, the school was dedicated on May 7, 1868. Cardozo decided that Avery should be a normal or teacher training school, offered a classical education and college preparatory training. The curriculum included courses in Latin, Greek, algebra, geometry, botany, natural philosophy, civil government, political economy, and English literature. The ultimate goal was to make the students better prepared to reach their full potential and to improve life in their communities. 1/4 of Avery students came from Charleston's free Black community. Many students came from modest backgrounds and struggled to pay the $1 monthly tuition. Yet, in 1869, Principal M.A. Warren declared that no qualified student too poor to pay would be denied admission. The very existence of a school offering a classical education and academic excellence challenged many tenets of pre-Civil War race relations. Although most local whites boycotted the school during its first year, by 1867, Cardozo and the school had gained the support of several prominent white South Carolinians, including Governor James L. Orr and Charleston's Mayor Peter Charles Gaylord. Regardless, hostility towards Avery was never completely absent in the 19th century. In 1893, the American Missionary reported that Avery was not heartily approved by the older and native white Charlestonians because they do not believe in Negro education anyway, beyond a very limited extent. After Francis Cardozo left in 1868 to become South Carolina's first Black Secretary of State, the AMA appointed a series of white principals to head Avery between 1868 and 1913. Under Principal Morrison Holmes, the school gained a well-earned reputation for high standards and came to be known as second to no other school of its kind in the entire system of educational institutions under the watch and care of the American Missionary Association. Avery graduates exerted a profound impact on Black education in the Lowcountry.
The appointment of Benjamin F. Cox as principal in 1915 marked a defining moment in Avery's history. Cox, a graduate of Fisk University in Nashville, Tennessee, was the first Black principal to lead the school on a permanent basis after Francis Cardozo. His wife, Jeanette Keeble Cox, also a Fisk graduate and an AMA teacher, founded the Phyllis Wheatley Literary and Social Club in 1916. The arrival of the Cox family gave rise to Avery's tradition to an entirely Black teaching staff. Septima Poinsett Clark, noted teacher and civil rights activist, was a graduate of the class of 1916 who taught at Avery briefly. In 1916, the entire administration and faculty were Black. Avery's yearbook, The Pinnacle, was dedicated to Avery's first colored faculty. During Cox's tenure, 1915 to 1936, he made broad changes with adding new facilities, introducing new courses in the curriculum, and establishing cultural improvements. Cox also mandated that the girls' graduation dress could not exceed $1.25 to make, with no lace or fussy trim. This rule kept down costs for parents who struggled to pay the tuition. It also eliminated the competition of who had the better dress. Cox displayed a portrait of Frederick Douglass and encouraged various senior classes to perform Shakespearean plays. He also introduced his famous rhetoricals, where students were required to render the readings of speeches of well-known orators or to give speeches on assigned topics they had researched. Avery's Glee Clubs performed concerts for Northern visitors at the Villa Margarita at the Citadel and for the city's Interracial Commission. Cox's administration also brought athletics to school with basketball and football teams. The students' commencement speeches between 1918 and 1935 reflect the influence of Black educators as Carter G. Woodson and suggest that Avery, under Cox, was strongly concerned with Black history, the role of women, political involvement, and international affairs. During those years, graduating students spoke on such themes as the NAACP, formerly known as the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, the Negro as a factor in American history, women's importance in the world affairs, the interracial movement in the South, and must there be another war? In 1919, Thomas Miller, a former Reconstruction-era congressman, approached Benjamin Cox with a proposal sponsored by the NAACP to replace white teachers in Charleston Black public schools with Black teachers. With Cox's blessing, Avery's teachers and students undertook a massive canvass of Charleston's Black community. They obtained 10,000 signatures on a petition supporting the proposal. Septima Poinsett was an Avery teacher with her students in tow, took part in this petition effort. By 1920, the city's public Black schools had both Black teachers and Black principals. Retiring in 1936, Cox's successors, Avery alum Frank A. DaCosta, a graduate of Lincoln University in Pennsylvania, and L. Howard Bennett, a graduate of Fisk University in Tennessee, Avery attracted a highly qualified teaching staff. Yet, World War II profoundly affected Avery's student body, some of whom were drafted. The 1942 commencement speeches reflected how deeply Avery was becoming involved in the war effort. Speeches such as Negro schools and colleges armed for defense, and women's opportunity in maintaining morale among servicemen were two among several topics concerning the graduates. The war years were also administratively challenging ones for Avery. In keeping with its policy of withdrawing from secondary education in areas where a public school system existed, the AMA announced that Avery must become entirely self-supporting. Parents and Avery supporters undertook a fundraising campaign that yielded over $10,000, thereby enabling the AMA to reduce its contributions to the annual budget to $5,000. Avery reformulated their school policy and eventually selected John F. Potts as the new school principal, who presided over Avery's transition from a private to a public school in 1947. Avery Institute closed in 1954 for financial reasons over the objections of the Avery Parents Teachers Association, many alumni and friends. Yet Avery continued to exert its influence with former students of Avery known as Averyites and their children well into the 1960s and 70s with the Civil Rights Movement. Our next podcast will discuss several of these Averyites as they unite to form the Avery Institute of Afro-American History and Culture. Each episode of our Avery Messenger Podcast will highlight an item or items from our archival collection. Today, we're going to discuss an image from our Avery School Memorabilia Collection. It comes from 1916, and it's a photograph of Benjamin Cox addressing the student body of the Avery Normal Institute in the auditorium. The photo symbolizes a new era for the school, one with progressive mindsets and an expanded curriculum and outlook on career paths for the students. This image can be found on a text panel when touring our Avery Institute model class located on our second floor. Presently known as the Reverend McKinley Washington Auditorium on our third floor holds the original load-bearing pillars that are still intact. These pillars are symbolic of the work of the Avery Research Center for African American History and Culture. Daron Lee Calhoun II is a scholar on the history of African American higher education. He currently serves as the Facilities Outreach and Public Programming Manager. Mr. Calhoun is a producer and head researcher on the feature-length documentary film project with director Julie Dash entitled Travel Notes of a Geechee Girl on the life and work of Dr. Verda May Grosvenor. He received his BA in African American Studies from Morehouse College and attended the College of Charleston in the Graduate History program. Calhoun has served as the chair of the City of Charleston's 350th Anniversary Committee on Education and History, the chair of the City of Charleston's Equity, Inclusion, and Racial Conciliation Internal Review Special Committee, and is the president of the Morehouse College National Alumni Association's Low Country chapter. He is a community organizer who served as an elected official on the Charleston County School District Board of Trustees, District 6, from 2022 to 2024, and most importantly, a proud father of 7 Ann Calhoun and husband to Charleston County School District teacher Anisha Patterson Calhoun. Ms. DaNia Childress, project director for the Mellon Grant, will be interviewing Mr. Calhoun.
Thank you. And before we get started into the questions, what I thought was so interesting in hearing about your bio of you being a Morehouse grad is that you also worked on the book covering the history of Morehouse from 1865 to 2021. Can you talk a little bit about your research process and what was something that you found very striking from being a student to doing the research?
Yeah, I started on that book in 2010, actually, 2009. Dr. Marcellus Barksdale, who was my advisor, my mentor, and now is the godfather of my daughter, received a grant in 2009 from the president of the college, at that point, Robert Michael Franklin, to redo our history. Morehouse has 3 history books that were written about it. The first one in 1925, I want to say, by Benjamin Brawley. The next one will be in 1917 by Benjamin Brawley. And 1967 by Edward Allen Jones, E.A. Jones. And then the last one would be his book. So as we are coming up on our 150th anniversary, they came to Dr. Barksdale and said, we need a new history book done. Our 150th anniversary was in 2017, and it was supposed to be released in 2017. But with Dr. Barksdale, nothing came easy. So he put together an entire history project called the 150th Anniversary History Project, where we had 5 different components of it. One being an oral history project, interviewing different alum. We had a coffee book that was supposed to come out. We had of course, the book project, also another picture book project, and one other component. But everything was supposed to come out in 2017. But over the last 15 years of Morehouse College's history, we could not end it at 2017. We were researching and found so many things. That's where my research and my scholarship comes in. And my research looked at the history of African American higher education, the foundings and fundings of HBCUs. But then with that, what writing project was how John D. Rockefeller tried to monopolize Black education. When we were researching that book, we went everywhere from New York City, from New York City to Schaumburg, up to Tarrytown, New York, where we have the Rockefeller Archive Center, down to D.C. at the Moreland Spingarn, North Carolina, AMA papers over at the Amistad, down to Macon, Georgia, where we have Mercer University. So everywhere that had documents on Black education and Black society and societies that founded Black education institutions, that's where we went.
And then my final question before we get back into the question is, what interested you in studying African American higher education and its founding, and your research topic on the Rockefeller influence?
It was because Morehouse took a chance on me. When I initially got to Morehouse in 2006, I was not accepted. When I went on a Black college tour when I was a senior in high school. I applied to all these different colleges, received all these different acceptances and whatnot. When I went to Morehouse, I was outside of the admissions office trying to figure out what was going on with my application. I was talking to this guy, talked to him for about 30 minutes as they were looking for my application, and the person I ended up talking to was the president of the college. I did not know he was the president. The admissions person came back out and said, well, you were initially denied. They talked it over, and they were like, we're going to take a chance on you. So at that moment, I knew I wanted to be at Morehouse. And being at Morehouse, especially being inside of African American Studies, I knew that I wanted to find out what gave these schools the opportunity to take chances on young Black brothers from the middle of Detroit who really had nothing for them going on. That's what really interested me in that. When I got to Rockefeller, that was my senior year. So at that point, I wanted to see why a lot of the HBCUs were the way they were. We're always scratching and clawing for $1 here, $1 there. I wanted to know why we got there. So that's when I started looking to the Rockefeller archive, the Rockefellers, and especially knowing how Spelman, they never had to want for nothing. But Morehouse, right across the street, we always had to beg for everything. So that's where I really got into the Rockefellers, the Baptists.
And another question I would have is, you mentioned Morehouse having to fight for funding. That kind of reminds me of the Avery Normal Institute and their fight for funding. A lot of the alumni that's coming together to save it. So what would you say are some good funding strategies in promoting the Avery Normal Institute, what they did, and then the work of Morehouse today as you are the president of the alumni chapter?
Really, when you start looking at Avery Normal Institute students, they went along with how other HBCUs and other historically Black institutions fought for their funding. They went back to their alumni. They used their alumni to go out into the world to try to bring money back in. Morehouse alum, we have a fundraiser coming up on October 4th right now for the Morehouse Glee Club coming into Charleston. The Avery Normal Institute students, they reached out even as early as 1878, they were reaching back out to their alumni and saying, we need you to give back to the Avery. Really, we always reach back to our own, getting to the alumni coming back and saying, all right, we need you to give back so this thing can keep going forward. And another thing that when you start looking at Avery Institute students as well as faculty and staff, they reached out to the wider community. That was also key. If the community did not rally around Avery, Avery wouldn't have been here as long. You see the same thing happening with Burke and Burke alumni. If the community did not rally behind Burke, even as recent as 2015, Burke would not be here right now. So that's one thing about the Charleston community, but then also Avery students. They always reach back within the community, but then also to their alum and supporters to bring that funding back in.
As a proud Morehouse alum, Morehouse man, but from Detroit, also thinking about the Avery Normal Institute, there is this conception that these institutions were very elitist and weren't necessarily opening to the people who didn't come from prominent backgrounds, and that the graduates kind of have this arrogance about them. Like, how do you combat that, or is that true?
Yes, there is a sense of the Morehouse mystique when we talk about Morehouse. Same thing you get with Avery students and Avery alum and Avery ice, as we call them. For us, they always say, you can tell a Morehouse man, but you can't tell him much. We have this air as Morehouse man called the air of expectancy. You are expected to do well, so well that no man living, dead, or yet to be born can do it any better. That was our charge when we first got there. That's our charge when we left. You see the same thing along with Avery Ice. One thing when we're doing our tours at the Avery, we always mention that, yes, in the city we were seen as an elitist school. We were founded as a school for formerly enslaved African Americans. However, when we became a private school, we had to charge tuition. If you look at it outside of our history, they will say if you were too poor to attend, we will still find a way for you to attend it. However, most people who came to the Avery were free people of color prior to the Civil War. We did not have the influx of 800 or so students that we had when we first founded. When we start seeing more schools popping up in Charleston, particularly when you see Burke come in, we had this mystique about Avery that we were what some people in the city would call the light-skinned school, and to whereas Burke would be what they would consider the dark-skinned school. It wasn't really like that. If you had money, you could attend Avery. There were a lot of people who attended Burke who were light-skinned. It was just the way that our curriculum was set up. We were set up as a classical education school, which many people would call the Duboisian school, or then Burke was set up as an industrial school, to where what people would call the Booker T. Washington type school. But that never meant that we did not have industrial training at the Avery. It didn't mean we didn't have that Burke didn't have classical education over there, but the way that the community, but the way that many people framed the Avery, that's what gave them that elitist mystique. And I can't lie, I mean, there are some things where, as Morehouse man, we do come up with a little bit of sauce with it, But I'm not going to apologize for it, but that's just the way we were set up for.
Thank you. And then going back to your research, what were some early objectives of the American Missionary Association and the Avery Normal Institute?
We needed to, right after the Civil War, and I say we because Avery lives through me as well, but the American Missionary Association, along with other philanthropic organizations, came to the South to found schools. They felt as if education was the way out of the depressed state that they felt as if all Black folk were in the South. And it's not just American Missionary Association. You look at the American Baptist Home Mission Society. You look at the AMEs. You look at the AME Zions. That's how you get schools like Tougaloo or Talladega, Fisk University, Clark College, Atlanta University. Or the Baptist, where you have Morehouse College, Spelman College. You have schools like Barbara Scotia, Bennett College, Bennett College for Women, where my wife went to school. All these schools are popping up in the South right after the end of the Civil War. For the education of Blacks. One thing about it, like we just mentioned with Booker T. Washington and Du Bois, we had different type of schools. We had normal training schools like the Avery was. We had different type of classical education schools where we wanted more people to go inside of business or banking and things like that. Schools that where they wanted more folk to go inside of ministry. You had schools where they said, okay, we're going to teach you a trade. And we're going to teach you a trade, be it like Tuskegee or Hampton Institute. They said, we're going to teach you a trade, and then you're going to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps that way. All of our schools had a purpose. They were all going to sit looking at the same line, but we're looking at the same goal, but in different streets, basically.
And then how was the Avery Normal Institute able to create a pipeline to other AMA colleges like Tougaloo, as you mentioned, Atlanta University, and Dillard, for instance?
Teachers, honestly. It was the teachers, and once we had our alum who went off to those schools and they came back, they were sending people up there. The way the application process, particularly if we're looking at the late 19th century, early 20th century, it wasn't the same way you do it now, where you just write up your application and send it in. Many times you had somebody who vouched for you, and they wrote a letter to the president over there, and then they said, all right, we need to let this person in, this, that. And you didn't go in and say, I want to declare my major as this. Somebody vouched for you to go inside of a lot of these schools. We see that really going up into, honestly, the 1960s and 70s. You can still find those letters. We still have letters inside the Benjamin Elijah Mays papers, where you have students from Charleston having people write Benjamin Elijah Mays in 1963 to say, hey, we have the student from Charleston who's at Burke, and we think he'll be an asset to Morehouse and this and that. Could you let him in? And Benjamin Elijah Mays would write back and say, okay, we're going to send you over to this person, that person. We're going to start trying to process this. So when you start looking at this pipeline, we were sending our students to the schools that we knew would be best for them. Now, also, we get another type of pipeline because those schools wouldn't let us come over. So you think about 1944, when our students at the Avery tried to integrate the College of Charleston, they said, absolutely not. We will not let you in over here, even though you're 5 blocks down the street. And what did they do? They gave all of those students scholarships to go to black schools. And they went to those black schools that were already ready for us. That would be at Talladega, where you got Ms. Weber going to. You know, a lot of our students went to Fisk. Most of our students went to South Carolina State and Claflin. But they were ready for us. They always wanted us to come over. So that's how we also get that pipeline. And then they started that legacy and started sending people over there as well.
Thank you. And you kind of touched on it a little bit more with your research on the Rockefeller and thinking about the American Missionary Association. How was the Avery Normal Institute able to create its own educational objectives outside of the AMA? As you mentioned, Rockefeller in your research, they kind of tried to control Black education, but how was Avery able to get around that and thinking about the AMA school setting?
When we look at Rockefeller, the reason I say he tried to monopolize Black education is because he tried to control the funding through the curriculum. John D. Rockefeller in 1902 founded the General Education Board because he was literally, people were begging him for money. And when he gave you the money, then he would send somebody that he trusted over to your school and tell them, okay, I want you to change this, I want you to change this, I want you to change this. For us at Morehouse, person that Morehouse is named after, Henry Lyman Morehouse, he wanted to be principal of the Avery, be it the president of the Avery in the 1890s. John D. Rockefeller told him, no, I can't use you. I need you for all the schools. He told him no. So John D. Rockefeller, because he's been giving Morehouse money, he already felt that he could control anything at the school, including the curriculum. When we get to the General Education Board, when he got tired of people actually asking him directly for money, the General Education Board had a full book about things that they were going to fund. All right, Morehouse needs a farm. You're going to put together a farm. They tried to change our curriculum. We were like, we're not doing that. So you see the same thing with the American Missionary Association. Although their hearts were pure, they also wanted to control the curriculum. And they control the curriculum through funding. So when you start looking at the American Missionary Association, they would say, okay, you need this, you need that. We're going to give you more books, but these are the books that you're going to have to buy. When you start looking at the classical education, I want them to learn this type of Latin. I want them to learn all these different things, but they may get mad when they come find out that we have a cobbling station downstairs. Or, they may not fund when we say we need to have more of the young women inside of home ec. They may not fund that because they want everybody to have this thing. So it went both ways. The American Missionary Association actually started pulling out their money, and not just the American Missionary Association, a lot of the philanthropic groups that came down to the South to found these schools, they start pulling their money out because, one, you got the Great Depression. So they're like, okay, we need to be only fund certain schools, which is why they pulled out of their funding out of like the normal schools and the K through 12 schools. So they were like, okay, we're going to focus on college education. But then in the 1940s, that's when you start seeing a lot of these organizations pull all the way out of education because it was an expensive sport.
And then what's the significance of Benjamin Cox leading the Avery Normal Institute and the faculty to becoming an all-Black institution in terms of staff?
It was very big. You start seeing the first all-Black faculty in the city of Charleston, and I would contend maybe not the entire state, but one of the biggest resurgence of that all-Black faculty. They did not want us to teach our own. They weren't allowing us to teach our own. When we got those normal degrees, they had to go out. So that's why you see a Septem Clark going other places, and you see all these teachers going out other places to the rural communities to teach. But when we had a chance to come back and teach our own, we talk about that pipeline. You have teachers who are able to go out and say, all right, I'm going to teach right here to the place that molded me, and I'm going to send you back out there to teach the world as well. And so Black kids being able to see the example of what they could be, that was major for Black Charleston as well as Black education writ large.
What do you think were some of the barriers in stopping the Avery Normal Institute from turning into a college?
It wasn't more such a barrier. We served our purpose. There was one HBCU that was founded in Charleston, which was Claflin. Claflin was founded right around the corner on East Bay. And then once Claflin moved up to Orangeburg, they said we didn't really need an HBCU down here, but Avery served as that launching pad for our students to go to HBCUs. I believe if Claflin never left Charleston, Avery and Claflin may have merged. We would have been the school that sent our students over to Claflin. I honestly do believe that. I feel as if I read that somewhere else. So, yeah, Claflin, we didn't need an HBCU down here. That's why we had Orangeburg right around the corner. And if you look at where Avery's situated, we have 7 HBCUs within an hour and a half drive to us, I think it would have flooded the market. But we served our purpose being that normal training school. We were teaching teachers to be teachers, and we sent them out to those HBCUs, and they came right back. So, like when we see somebody like use the example of Miss Cynthia McCautry Smith, who received her normal training at the Avery, went over to Bennett College for Women, came back down to teach at the Avery. That was that's where we serve our purpose at. And we have so many examples of people who not even just came back to Avery, but just went off everywhere else to those HBCUs and went on to become teachers or professors or great business people, organizers, activists all over the world.
And then my final question for you is, what's the lasting legacy of the Avery Normal Institute?
It's the foundation. Avery Normal Institute laid the foundation for organizing. It laid the foundation for Black education. It laid the foundation for everything that we do today, for being able to tell the stories of Black people. The Avery Normal Institute was teaching Black history in the 19th century. And you don't see a lot of schools doing that, particularly schools that weren't founded and funded by Black people. You didn't see a lot of schools doing that, but they were still teaching Black history in the 19th century. Everything that we do today is based off of that foundation. All of the organizing work we do at the Avery, all of the advocacy work we do at the Avery. You can find any program that goes on at the Avery that you can tie back to what was going on at the Avery Normal Institute.
Thank you so much for joining us today.
We thank you for listening.
And a special thank you to the Mellon Foundation for supporting this initiative.